My unfaithful wife shattered our marriage beyond repair. At 37, she started a new job about 4.5 months ago, where she quickly formed new friendships. Unfortunately, I, 36, wasn't a fan of these new companions. They were fiercely outspoken feminists who thrived on conflict. Whether you opened the door for them or didn't, you were wrong in their eyes. At first, I dismissed it as harmless banter, but in the past 2 months, my wife began to change in unsettling ways. We've been married for 11 years and have 2 children, a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. Yet everything about her behavior started deteriorating. She began accusing me of bizarre things, like being inherently evil simply because of historical injustices perpetrated by men. No matter what I did, gestures she used to appreciate, everything became a trigger for an argument. It was maddening. I tried to remain patient, but most fights ended with me quietly saying, "What have I done wrong besides love you?" This would usually leave her muttering under her breath, only for the cycle to restart the next day with a new twist. Then, about 5 weeks ago, I felt a deep, gnawing sense that something was seriously wrong. One night, she came home late without telling me. Her phone was unreachable, and she reeked of alcohol. Her demeanor was distant and cold. When I confronted her, she brushed me off, accusing me of being controlling and overanalyzing the situation. But this pattern repeated itself a few more times, each incident deepening my suspicions. When I checked her phone, I didn't find concrete evidence. She had clearly deleted many messages, but one conversation stood out. It was with one of her new friends, discussing how she planned to approach me about opening our relationship. That was the moment it hit me like a freight train. She was cheating. In the chat, she mentioned she'd bring up the idea during breakfast on the second Monday of December. I was ready. I had already decided this wasn't salvageable, and my focus shifted to protecting myself and our kids. That morning, as our children were away at their grandparents', she casually floated the question, "What do you think about an open relationship?" I was prepared. Recording our conversation, I switched to a calm, yet steely interrogation mode. Her smug demeanor quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Who is he?" I asked directly. "What are you talking about?" she replied, feigning confusion. "If you want to have this conversation with me, don't insult my intelligence. Be honest. If you're not honest, what's the point of this?" She stammered. "What do you mean?" "Don't lie to me. If you do, we're done. Divorce, no discussion. Do you understand?" Cornered, she finally admitted to 2 one-night stands with married men, providing names, details, and even confessing that she hadn't always used protection. But the bombshell was her plan to pursue a co-worker she claimed was in an open marriage. She even suggested setting me up with one of her friends. The audacity was staggering. While she stepped away to the bathroom, I seized the opportunity to recover deleted messages on her phone using recovery software. The evidence I uncovered confirmed everything I feared and more. I also installed a tracking app to stay informed about any future actions. When she returned, I handed her the phone and told her to leave. She erupted, yelling that I was controlling, oppressive, and incapable of loving her. Her words dripped with entitlement as she declared she was justified in everything she had done and expected me to accept it. I didn't engage. I silently packed her belongings as she circled me, shouting accusations. Finally, at the front door, she ran out of steam. I stood there silently, watching as she reluctantly left for her parents' house. As she descended the stairs, I told her, "You're single now. Do whatever you want. I'm not controlling you anymore. My lawyer will contact you in January." When she turned to respond, I shut and locked the door. Later, I saw her chatting with her friends online, receiving praise for demanding her rights and being strong. They encouraged her to accuse me of domestic abuse if necessary, sharing how one friend had exploited such claims to strip her ex-husband of everything. The calculated malice in their advice sent chills down my spine. This was war. To protect myself and my home, I've ordered cameras to monitor every corner of my property. Given what I've uncovered, I know I need to document everything. Reading her chats and seeing her utter disregard for me has left me in disbelief. Never in my life have I threatened or mistreated her, But her messages with her affair partner, AP, paint a completely different picture. I watched as she messaged her AP, arranging to meet at a hotel. I was stunned. Without hesitation, I went online and quickly tracked down the AP's wife. It wasn't hard to find her on Facebook. After she accepted my friend request, I told her everything, sparing no details, including where her husband and my wife were meeting. She thanked me curtly and hung up. Hours later, she sent me a video. She had stormed into the hotel and confronted them. From the sound of her rage, this wasn't the first time her husband had cheated. Her voice cracked as she yelled, "You effing asshole. Again? To me and the kids? I told you we were done if you ever pulled this again." Then, the camera panned to my wife, sitting on the edge of the bed, hastily dressing. I threw up the first time I saw that video. The AP's wife slapped her across the face and unleashed a tirade of profanity. I sent my wife a simple message after seeing the footage. "I saw the video from the hotel. I never want you near me again." Her response? She seemed to treat our interaction as a game, like she was winning somehow. It was surreal, as though she wasn't even processing the reality of the situation. Was she delusional? Did she not realize we were divorcing? Logging into her family's WhatsApp group, I informed them that we were divorcing because of her infidelity. I thanked them for their kindness to me over the years before disconnecting. A few members reached out to me afterward, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't have the emotional energy for it. I explained everything to my parents, and my father sent her a message telling her she was no longer welcome at their home for Christmas. They invited me to stay with them, and I've been here ever since. My boss, hearing about my situation, graciously gave me leave until mid-January to sort everything out. Meanwhile, I've been watching my wife's increasingly desperate exchanges with her so-called friends. It's painfully obvious they don't care about her as much as she thought. Her AP isn't exactly rushing to support her either. She sent me countless messages and even showed up at my parents' house, demanding to celebrate Christmas with us. My father threatened to call the police if she didn't leave. Now I spend my nights researching divorce lawyers while crying my heart out. The pain has been unbearable since I arrived here. I can't understand how someone I loved so deeply could destroy our family like this. Reading her chats and seeing how little remorse she has makes the betrayal cut even deeper. I've only responded to her messages twice. It doesn't matter what you say. I don't know who you are anymore. You're not my wife. The woman I married would never destroy my heart and soul with a smile on her face. We're done. Divorce is inevitable, and you no longer have any influence or rights over me. You are no longer the person I married. My wife would never condemn our children to a life of pain and suffering in a broken home. The person you've become is selfish and unrecognizable. I don't care what you say. We're over. Her messages stopped after the second one, but the silence hasn't brought me peace. This Christmas has been the worst of my life. In a moment of raw emotion, I told the kids about the divorce. They asked when their mom was coming home, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out the truth. Mommy doesn't want to be a family anymore. She wants to be with other men, and we're getting divorced. The children were devastated. Luckily, my parents have been incredible, showering them with love and attention while I remain an emotional wreck. I wish I had waited until after Christmas to break the news and arrange counseling for them, but the words just slipped out. Looking back, I know there's no way I can reconcile with her. I'd lose all self-respect if I did. Her utter lack of remorse and callousness in her actions are unforgivable. Yet, I can't wrap my head around how she still believes she has any right to make demands. Is she mentally ill? Completely detached from reality? I don't know. For now, I'm taking things one step at a time. A lawyer friend reassured me that monitoring her phone was legal since I own the device and its subscription. Knowing this has brought me some relief, but it doesn't ease the emotional toll. What hurt the most was finding messages where my wife described our marriage and children as burdens. How could someone be so heartless? She left her camera on, though, and I saw her texting someone while smirking to herself. It was painfully obvious that she was mocking me or coordinating some kind of stunt. When she returned, she made a snide comment about how boring and predictable I was being. I ignored the jab and calmly repeated, "Let's stay focused on the divorce proceedings." This seemed to irritate her even more. She huffed and began ranting about how unfair it was that I was holding her back from living her best life. She doubled down on her claims that marriage and family were burdens that had stifled her potential, reiterating the same blanket accusations she had made in her chats with her friends. I kept my tone neutral as I responded. It seems you've already decided what you want. All I want now is an agreement that protects the children and ensures a fair outcome for everyone involved. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "Fair outcome? Please, you're just trying to control me like you always have." At that moment, I felt a surge of frustration, but I held it together. Her words were hollow, the same recycled rhetoric she'd been using to justify her actions. I ended the call shortly after, stating that my lawyer would handle all further communication. She didn't seem to care and waved me off as if I were an afterthought. Later that day, my lawyer called to inform me that the restraining order had been served. My STBXW's reaction, according to witnesses, was dramatic. She threw a fit, screaming about how I was trying to destroy her life and that I was just like every other man. Frankly, it was exactly what I expected. Meanwhile, my lawyer also confirmed the STD results would strengthen my case for full custody. Her reckless behavior, especially when it puts the children's well-being at risk, was undeniable proof of her instability. The fact that she hadn't reached out to our kids at all during this time only added to the argument. Talking to the ex-husband of my wife's feminist friend was eye-opening and chilling. He recounted in horrifying detail how she had fabricated claims of abuse, dragged him through years of court battles, and alienated him from his children. He lost his home, his reputation, and even spent months living on the streets. It was a warning of what could happen to me if I wasn't careful. Hearing his story solidified my resolve. I couldn't afford to be naive about this. I needed to gather as much evidence as possible, not just for my sake, but for my children. The lawyer suggested the restraining order wasn't just a precaution. It was a message that I wouldn't be blindsided. The positive chlamydia test broke something inside me. Whatever lingering empathy or sadness I felt for my wife disappeared in that moment. Any thought of reconciliation or leniency vanished. My focus shifted entirely to protecting my children and securing our future. I'm angry, angrier than I've ever been in my life. But this anger is fueling me, giving me the strength to fight back. I've spent too long letting her dictate the narrative, and now it's my turn to take control. I've set up additional meetings with my lawyer to strategize. I'm compiling every bit of evidence I can. The chats, the financial discrepancies, her reckless behavior. I refuse to let her walk away from this unscathed or with any leverage over my kids' lives. Every day feels like a battle, but I'm determined to win. Not for revenge, but for my children and for myself. I owe it to all of us to build a life free from her toxicity. And I will. She waltzed in like she owned the place, her harpy friend in tow, wearing a smug expression that only added to my growing frustration. My lawyer, ever the professional, remained calm and poised. I followed her instructions to a T, keeping my composure despite every nerve in my body screaming at me to react. My SDBXW started the meeting with an exaggerated sigh and a dismissive wave toward the legal documents my lawyer had prepared. "I don't see why we need all this drama," she said, rolling her eyes. Her friend chimed in immediately. "Yeah, this whole process is just unnecessary. You're making such a big deal out of nothing." I clenched my jaw, but stayed quiet. My lawyer placed her hands flat on the table, a clear signal for me to let her take the lead. "We're here to ensure that both parties have a fair and equitable resolution," my lawyer said evenly. "It's in everyone's best interest to resolve this as smoothly as possible." My SDBXW scoffed. "Fair? He's the one acting like a victim. I'm the one who's been oppressed for years in this marriage. And now he's trying to play the martyr?" Her friend nodded in agreement, crossing her arms like she was ready for a fight. "Exactly. This whole thing is just another example of how men try to control women. He's just mad that she's finally standing up for herself." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep myself from snapping. My lawyer responded calmly. "We're not here to discuss personal grievances. The goal is to reach a mutual agreement that protects the interests of both parties, particularly the children." At the mention of the kids, My SDBXW's demeanor shifted slightly. She waved her hand dismissively, but didn't argue further. I could tell she didn't want to address her lack of involvement with them since everything started. Then came the most bizarre moment of the meeting. My SDBXW leaned forward with a smug grin and said, "You know, I don't even think he wants this divorce. He's just doing all this to punish me. He'll come crawling back eventually." Her harpy friend smirked as if they had just delivered some brilliant insight. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I was seething. My lawyer placed her hands firmly on the table again, signaling me to let her handle it. "My client is very clear about his intentions," my lawyer said firmly. "This meeting is about moving forward, not rehashing the past or making baseless assumptions." The rest of the meeting was a train wreck. My SDBXW refused to sign anything, claiming she needed more time to think things over. Her friend spent most of the time making passive-aggressive comments about the patriarchy and how women always get the short end of the stick. When the meeting finally ended, my lawyer pulled me aside. "She's trying to drag this out, hoping you'll lose your resolve or make a mistake," she said. "Stay patient. We'll keep pushing for a resolution, but be prepared for this to go to court if she continues to stall." That night, I reviewed the events of the meeting in my mind over and over. The sheer audacity of her actions and her delusions of control left me stunned. She was living in a fantasy world, completely detached from reality, and somehow thought she could manipulate me into submission. The kids were my biggest concern. They were starting to ask more questions about why their mother wasn't around and why things felt so different. My heart broke every time I saw the confusion and sadness in their eyes. I did my best to reassure them, but the weight of their questions crushed me. "Why doesn't Mommy want to see us anymore?" my son had asked earlier that day. I struggled to find the right words, finally settling on, "Mommy's going through a tough time right now, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." It felt hollow, but what else could I say? Moving forward, I'm holding on, but it's not easy. Every day feels like a battle to protect my kids, my sanity, and what little remains of my dignity. My lawyer has assured me that we're in a strong position, but the thought of dragging this out for months or even years is exhausting. For now, I'm focusing on my kids and taking things one step at a time. The pain is still raw, but I know I have to stay strong for them. They deserve better than the chaos their mother has brought into our lives. I'll keep fighting, not out of spite or anger, but because it's the only way forward. One day, I hope to look back on all this as a painful chapter that led to something better. Until then, I'll keep pushing through. For them, for me, for a future where we can finally find peace. Of course, the police officers agreed, but their expressions were serious, almost apologetic. They wouldn't tell me much, only that they had to follow protocol. I took my kids outside and tried to keep them calm, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. The neighbors were peeking out of their windows, whispering amongst themselves as the officers entered my home. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came back out and told me they had received a report of illegal activity in my home, specifically that I was allegedly hiding drugs and other contraband. I nearly laughed out loud at how absurd it was, but the situation was far from funny. It was clear to me who was behind this. Once they finished their search, finding absolutely nothing, the lead officer apologized for the intrusion and explained that they were obligated to act on the tip they'd received. As the police drove away, my kids clung to me, scared and confused. I reassured them as best I could, though inside, I was boiling with rage. That evening, I forwarded the incident to my lawyer. She wasn't surprised. "This is a classic move," she said. "They're trying to intimidate you or create chaos before the hearing. But since nothing was found, this will only work against them in court." Her calm professionalism was a balm to my frayed nerves, but the whole ordeal left me shaken. Saturday was quieter, though I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next shoe to drop. And drop it did. Late that night, I got a series of frantic texts from mutual acquaintances. Apparently, my SDBXW and her Harpy squad had posted a series of unhinged rants about me on social media, accusing me of everything from controlling her finances to being emotionally abusive. The accusations were wild, completely unfounded, and clearly aimed at painting me as the villain. My initial instinct was to respond, to defend myself, but my lawyer's voice echoed in my head. No engagement. Let them dig their own hole. The hearing itself, which finally took place Monday afternoon, was a surreal experience. My STBXW showed up in a state I can only describe as smugly detached. She was alone, no lawyer, no witnesses, just her and a stack of printed papers that she claimed were evidence against me. My lawyer and I exchanged a glance, both of us baffled at her lack of preparation. When the judge asked her to explain her side, she launched into a bizarre tirade, accusing me of everything under the sun. She claimed I had manipulated her, held her back, even spied on her, though she conveniently left out that it was my phone she was using. Her rant was filled with contradictions and lacked any coherent timeline. It was painful to listen to, but I stayed silent as instructed. When it was my lawyer's turn, she presented our case with precision and clarity. She submitted the signed divorce agreement, proof of my STBXW's infidelity, and evidence of her neglect of our children. She even mentioned the baseless police search and the defamatory social media posts. By the time she finished, it was clear the judge had had enough. The ruling came quickly. The judge upheld the divorce agreement as valid and binding, granting me full custody of the kids and requiring no additional spousal support. My STBXW was visibly stunned, her smug demeanor crumbling in an instant. She tried to object, but the judge cut her off, stating that the evidence overwhelmingly supported my case. As we left the courtroom, my lawyer gave me a rare smile. "You're free," she said simply. And just like that, the weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift piece by piece. Driving home, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. My STBXW's behavior, the betrayal, the lengths she'd gone to in an attempt to control the narrative, it all seemed so distant now, like a bad dream I was finally waking up from. The kids and I are adjusting. It's not easy, but we're finding our rhythm. They're in therapy, and I'm working on rebuilding the stable home they deserve. My focus now is on them and on healing. As for my STBXW, she's already reached out, claiming she didn't mean for things to get this far, and asking if we can start over. I didn't respond. There's no starting over, not after everything she's done. This chapter of my life is closed. It's time to write a new one. Her refusal to comply led her parents to kick her out. They were heartbroken, but they said they couldn't support her self-destructive behavior any longer. She tried calling me again, but I refused to answer. My lawyer advised me not to engage with her unless it was absolutely necessary, and always through her. On Tuesday, her friends from the Harpy Squad were either still in jail or recovering. Henrietta's situation worsened as her passenger, the one in critical condition, was not improving. The potential legal repercussions were snowballing, and it became increasingly clear that Henrietta might face significant jail time. Meanwhile, Henri, who had been granted temporary custody of his kids, was beginning to rebuild his life. Seeing his happiness after finally being reunited with his children gave me hope. Despite everything, it reminded me that there's a path forward, even after immense hardship. As for me, I started the process of selling the house. I couldn't imagine staying in it any longer, not after everything that had happened. The memories, the chaos, the trauma, it was too much. Moving away felt like the clean slate I desperately needed for myself and my kids. By Wednesday, I had found a real estate agent through Bob's recommendation. The agent was discreet and understanding, fully aware of my situation. My priority was finding a new home where the kids and I could start fresh, away from the shadow of my ex-wife's destruction. Speaking of my ex, her behavior continued to be erratic. Despite her legal troubles, she seemed unwilling or unable to grasp the gravity of her situation. Her calls to me were filled with demands, accusations, and bizarre justifications for her actions. She alternated between blaming me for her downfall and claiming she still cared about the kids, though she made no actual effort to see them or contact them. Her parents, though devastated, were starting to support me and the kids more. They admitted they had been blind to her behavior for years and were ashamed of how they had dismissed my concerns in the past. They even offered to help with childcare if needed, though I was cautious about how much involvement I wanted from them given the circumstances. By Friday, I began to feel like things were finally stabilizing. My support system, my parents, Henri, Bob, and others, kept reminding me that I wasn't alone. The kids were slowly adjusting, though they still asked difficult questions about their mother. "Why doesn't Mommy want to be with us?" my youngest asked one night. It broke me, but I told him the truth as gently as I could. "Mommy is going through something very hard right now. It's not because of you. She loves you in her way, but right now, she's not able to show it the way she should." I don't know if they fully understood, but they seemed comforted by the reassurance that they were loved. As I sat down that evening, reflecting on everything, I realized I had been through hell and back. But I was still standing. My family and I were on the path to healing, and while the road ahead would be long and difficult, I felt ready to take the next step. The house would sell, the divorce would finalize, and one day, this entire nightmare would be just a story, a painful one, but one that marked the beginning of a new chapter for me and my children. She reached out to me from the hospital, clearly shaken. She told me she was done with the group and wanted nothing more to do with any of them, including my ex-wife. Her tone was apologetic, almost regretful, but it felt like too little too late. She admitted they had been spiraling out of control for months, feeding off each other's reckless behavior. She said she never intended for things to go this far, but now that she was facing the consequences, she wanted to start over. I wished her well, but I kept the conversation brief. I couldn't get drawn into more drama, not now. My ex is still with her parents, under strict terms. They've set firm boundaries. No drugs, regular therapy, and a commitment to change if she wants their support. From what I've heard through mutual contacts, she's struggling to adapt. She's angry, deflecting blame, and refusing to take full accountability for what she's done. The divorce process is progressing as planned. My lawyer has been amazing, ensuring everything stays on track. I should have the finalized papers within the next couple of months, and then I can finally put this chapter behind me. The kids are slowly adjusting to the new normal. My dad has been a rock for all of us, stepping in as a constant source of support and stability. This past weekend at the cabin was a breath of fresh air. Watching the kids laugh and play in the snow, even just for a little while, reminded me that there's still joy to be found, even in the darkest times. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the anger, the grief, and the sense of betrayal that still haunts me. It's not easy, but I'm determined to come out of this stronger for myself and for my kids. I still don't fully understand why my ex did what she did, and maybe I never will. But I've accepted that I can't fix her, and it's not my responsibility to. My focus now is on healing and building a better future for my family. This whole ordeal has been a nightmare, but I'm starting to see glimpses of light at the end of the tunnel. It's a long road ahead, but I'm moving forward step by step. For the first time in months, I feel a sliver of hope. She woke up, but was in a terrible state. I spoke with her nurse, who mentioned how disheartening it was that no one had come to visit her during her time there. They had reached out to her family, but they declined to see her. I was concerned about the possibility of the people who attacked my ex-wife coming after me or the kids, so I arranged through her nurse to have a conversation with her. Surprisingly, she agreed. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but I needed to understand what had happened since she started spending time with her new crowd. The conversation began awkwardly. She asked if I wanted a certain favor for $20. I offered her $50 instead for information. What I learned was harrowing. The women she called her friends were deeply entrenched in drug addiction. One of them, Henrietta, had convinced her to join the group despite the reservations of the others. Henrietta also persuaded her to try drugs and join in their wild parties. It wasn't long before my wife became hooked. Once addicted, she began selling herself to fund her habit. Hearing this crushed me. The woman I once loved, who had been my everything, had fallen into this darkness. The stark reality of her transformation into someone unrecognizable was devastating. According to her, Henrietta was the ringleader, using their feminist rhetoric as a cover for their actions. She explained it bluntly. They weren't empowered or independent. They were simply feeding their egos to justify the choices they made under the grip of addiction. She admitted that her addiction had taken over, and she had alienated everyone in her life. No one wanted to visit her or have anything to do with her anymore. With no hope for the future, she told me she regretted surviving. Her once vibrant personality was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, broken shell of the woman she used to be. Henrietta, meanwhile, faced a barrage of charges: drug trafficking, child neglect, driving under the influence, property damage, and more. She was denied bail, and her future seemed destined for prison. The other women in the group had suffered in different ways, but none more than Henrietta's children, who were now in foster care. Some Redditors had warned me that my ex might attempt to end her life. Unfortunately, they were right. On a Saturday morning, while I was at the cabin with the kids, I received a chilling message from her, a clear suicide note. She confessed everything: her addiction, the prostitution, her failings as a mother and wife. I immediately called her father and, using the location tracking from her phone, directed him to her. He found her unconscious on a park bench and rushed her to the hospital. She had overdosed and was severely hypothermic. A few minutes later, and it might have been too late, thanks to her father, she was placed in a rehab facility under court-ordered guardianship. She began a sedated detox program, monitored around the clock. I offered to cover the costs anonymously, ensuring that she could focus on recovery without knowing I was helping. It was a small gesture in the face of everything that had happened. Henry, ever the hero, took matters into his own hands regarding the men who had assaulted my ex-wife. After presenting the chat logs in court that implicated Henrietta, they assumed my wife had handed over the evidence. Henry confronted them in their dingy apartment. His sheer physical presence and stern warning pushed them to confess everything to the police, effectively removing any threat to me and the kids. I've since moved into a new apartment, thanks to Bob's help. While I'm grateful for the safety and fresh start, the emotional toll remains overwhelming. My friends and family have been my lifeline, but the pain of losing the woman I once loved still lingers. She is no longer the person I married, and I know there is no going back, but the memories of who she used to be haunt me. Through all of this, my kids have shown remarkable resilience. Framing their mother's struggles as a sickness has helped them process what's happening. They understand that she needs time and help to heal, even though the road ahead is uncertain. Sadly, my ex-wife passed away in rehab. The cause of death was a drug overdose, and though the exact details remain unclear, one theory is that she smuggled drugs in and a hidden stash burst. This is where my story ends. I won't be answering further comments or sharing updates. To those who have supported me, thank you for your kindness and guidance during this difficult journey.